I fixed her armor, she growled. Don't pretend that touch meant nothing. It was the kind of place where people came to escape the noise outside, to slow down and breathe, even if only for a moment. Ethan sat near the corner, a notebook open in front of him, but he wasn't writing. He was watching, as he often did, noticing details that others overlooked. His eyes wandered over the room with the quiet attentiveness of someone used to observing rather than being observed. There was a woman at a nearby table, hunched over, her hands working busily at something in her lap. She was trying to fix a strap on a piece of worn leather, twisting it with concentration. Her brow was furrowed, her lips pressed together, a small frown forming between her eyes. Ethan recognized the material immediately. It was leather, heavy and thick, shaped into what looked like part of a suit of armor. Not the kind knights wore in stories exactly, but a carefully crafted piece for reenactments or sparring. The scratches, scuffs, and faded areas told him it had seen use and abuse. Whoever had made it had done so with care, and whoever wore it clearly relied on it a great deal. He shifted slightly in his seat, torn between minding his own business and offering help. He had repaired hundreds of pieces like this, each one with its own story. Something about the way she was struggling drew him in. She twisted the strap again and muttered under her breath, frustration tinged in her voice. "Excuse me," he said finally, his voice soft, careful not to startle her. "Do you want a hand with that?" Then her eyes softened slightly, though suspicion lingered there. "I can manage," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "I don't doubt that," he replied, giving her a small, encouraging smile. "It just looks like it could use a little adjustment." The rain drummed on the window behind them, creating a steady, soothing backdrop to the tension in the small space between them. Finally, she sighed, a short, reluctant sound, and nodded. "Fine, but only if you don't break it," she said, a trace of humor threading her tone. Ethan rose and moved over to her table, careful not to invade her space. He set his own hands gently on the leather, feeling its weight and texture, noticing the areas where it had been bent and stretched repeatedly. He could see the little tears forming along the edges, the places where the stitching had loosened. It wasn't difficult to fix, but it needed patience and care, something he had in abundance. As he worked, he kept the conversation light, commenting on the craftsmanship of the armor, asking about the patterns embossed into the leather. She answered reluctantly at first, her words clipped, but gradually she began to relax, talking more openly about her hobby and the history behind the piece she wore. Her voice carried a mix of pride and nostalgia, and Ethan listened, fascinated by the depth of her knowledge and the intensity with which she spoke about her craft. He noticed, though, that she tensed whenever his hands brushed hers. It was a fleeting reaction, almost imperceptible, but it told him a lot about her. She was cautious, protective, someone who had been hurt before and wasn't quick to trust. He didn't push, but he didn't shy away either. He let his hands move steadily over the leather, repairing the tiny tears, tightening the straps, and smoothing the worn edges. Minutes passed, but in that short span, the air between them changed. The initial awkwardness gave way to a quiet rhythm, the kind of connection that forms in silence when two people focus on a shared task. Every now and then, she would glance at him, her expression softening, a faint smile breaking through the walls she had built. When he finally stepped back, the armor was whole again, every strap secure, every crease smoothed. It looked almost new, though the subtle signs of use still told its story. She lifted it, turning it over in her hands, and for a moment her eyes lingered on his. "Thanks," she said quietly, almost as if the word itself carried more weight than she intended. "You're welcome," he replied, his voice gentle. "It's well made, someone took their time with it." Then with a small, almost imperceptible laugh, she said, "I guess I underestimated it, and maybe you too." Just a flicker of curiosity and perhaps something more, a recognition that someone saw her, really saw her, without judgment. The rain outside continued to fall, a steady, soothing presence, and the cafe felt warmer somehow, smaller and more intimate. People came and went, conversations rose and fell, but in that corner time seemed to stretch. For a brief moment, the world narrowed to the two of them and the leather armor that had brought them together. Ethan noticed the small details, the way her fingers lingered on the straps, the way she shifted in her seat when he reached across her, the subtle tension in her shoulders that relaxed slightly when he moved with care. Every movement told a story, every gesture a piece of the puzzle he was beginning to understand. "Do you do this often?" she asked, suddenly breaking the comfortable silence. "Repair armor," he said, a hint of surprise in his voice. "Yes, for years. It's my work, my passion." Every scratch, every tear means something. It was easy, the way some conversations are, when there's no pressure, no expectation, just the quiet understanding that comes from two people meeting by chance but connecting in ways that feel intentional. Finally, she stood, lifting the repaired armor carefully. She looked down at him, her expression thoughtful, almost unreadable. "Maybe I underestimated you," she said again, her voice soft. "Or maybe I just didn't expect someone to care this much about this." For a moment she paused, glanced back at him, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition, a subtle acknowledgement of the connection that had formed in that short, rainy afternoon. As she stepped out into the rain, Ethan watched her go, feeling a quiet sense of anticipation. He didn't know what would come next, or if they would meet again, but he knew this was the beginning of something. Something that, like the armor, required patience, care, and the willingness to face the small vulnerabilities that most people try to hide. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a spark of curiosity, not just about the armor, but about the person who wore it. The following day, Ethan's workshop smelled of leather, oil, and wood shavings. Tools were neatly arranged on walls, their sharp edges gleaming in the soft morning light that filtered through the dusty windows. The shelves were lined with spools of thread, scraps of leather in every shape and color, and small containers filled with rivets, buckles, and tiny metal pieces that glinted like stars in the dim room. Clara arrived a little after 10, carrying the armor she had brought to the cafe yesterday. Her boots made soft thuds against the wooden floor, and the faint jingle of the buckles echoed in the quiet room. Ethan looked up from a half-finished project, a worn leather glove he had been repairing, and gave her a nod. "Good morning," he said simply. "Morning," she replied, placing the armor carefully on the large wooden table in the center of the room. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic, as though setting down a treasure. Ethan studied the piece for a moment, noting the scratches and small tears more closely than the day before. "It's in worse shape than I thought," he said, his tone neutral but attentive. "But I can fix it." "It's been through a lot." Clara was a puzzle, and he liked puzzles. He set to work, stretching the leather carefully, adjusting the seams, threading a needle with patience that only years of practice could bring. The workshop was quiet except for the gentle scratching of the needle through the material, the occasional soft clink of a buckle, and the rain continuing its rhythmic tapping against the windows. Clara watched him work in silence at first, her hands folded in her lap. She was used to doing everything herself, controlling every detail, but there was something about Ethan that made her willing to step back and let him take the lead. She didn't speak, but her eyes followed his hands, noting every careful motion. "You take your work seriously," she said finally, breaking the silence. "I do," he replied without looking up. "Every piece deserves attention, every scratch matters. If you ignore them, they can get worse." As he worked, their conversation grew slowly, carefully, like two people stepping onto a fragile bridge. Clara told him about the day she had first worn the armor, about the excitement and fear of trying something new, and about the competitions she had taken part in over the years. Her voice held pride, tinged with nostalgia. Ethan listened, occasionally asking questions, never interrupting, letting her tell the story in her own rhythm. "You really know your craft," she said at one point, watching him repair a stubborn strap. "It's not just skill. You understand the material, how it moves, how it responds. It resists when you're careless, but if you're gentle, it can bend and hold in ways you wouldn't expect." Clara's shoulders relaxed just slightly, her guard lowering without her even realizing it. Then, as he worked on the shoulder straps, their hands brushed lightly. It was accidental, a fleeting touch, but the effect was immediate. Clara stiffened, her fingers tightening around the leather. Ethan paused, noticing the reaction, and withdrew his hand slowly, giving her a reassuring smile. "It's okay," he said softly. "No rush." Hours passed like this, filled with small moments. The scrape of a needle, the soft thud of leather being smoothed, the occasional exchange of stories, smiles, and laughter. The sun moved across the sky, casting warm, golden light into the dusty corners of the workshop. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and shiny, reflecting the colors of the buildings around them. At one point, Clara leaned over to examine a repaired buckle. Her hands hovered just above his as she reached for it, and for a second the air between them seemed to hold its breath. She caught herself, pulling back slightly, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Ethan noticed, but he didn't comment. He simply kept his hands busy, letting her regain her comfort in her own time. "Why do you do this?" she asked suddenly, her tone curious but careful. "Repairing things like this." Second chance, she repeated softly. I think I understand that. I've been hurt too many times to trust easily. For a moment, the two of them were quiet again, the sound of the workshop filling the space between them. And in that quiet, a subtle understanding formed, a connection that wasn't forced or sudden, but gentle, careful, and steady. By mid-afternoon, the armor was almost fully repaired. Ethan inspected each strap, buckle, and seam, making sure everything was secure. Clara watched him work, leaning forward slightly, fascinated by the precision and care he applied. She could see the effort, the patience, and the pride he took in his work. It was different from anything she had experienced before. "You're really good at this," she said finally, her tone more relaxed, almost admiring. "I like to think so," he replied, smiling faintly. "But it's not just about skill. It's about care. You can't rush it and you can't force it." Clara lifted it, turning it over in her hands, her eyes wide with appreciation. "It's perfect," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan smiled. "It's not perfect, it still carries its history, but it's strong and it will last." She looked up at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, then softened into something warmer. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." There was no rush, no pressure, just the calm presence of two people who had shared something meaningful, small but significant. As Clara prepared to leave, she hesitated, looking at him with a flicker of something unspoken in her eyes. Ethan noticed but didn't comment. He simply smiled gently, letting her take the moment she needed. "See you tomorrow?" she asked finally, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Of course," he said, nodding. And with that she left, the repaired armor carefully held in her hands, and Ethan watched her go, feeling the quiet stirrings of something new. A connection that had begun with leather and thread, but was already moving towards something deeper. Something neither of them fully understood, yet the workshop was quiet that evening, lit only by a single lamp that cast a warm, golden glow over the worn wooden tables and scattered tools. The rain had returned, tapping gently against the windows, a soft rhythm that filled the silence with its steady presence. Clara sat across from Ethan, the repaired armor laid out carefully between them. She was quiet, her eyes tracing the lines of the leather, noticing the careful repairs he had made. Each stitch, each smoothed edge spoke of his patience and skill. Yet there was something unspoken hanging in the air, a tension that neither of them could ignore. It was more than the armor, it was the small connection that had begun to form between them in these past days. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, his hands resting on the table. He watched her, noticing the way her fingers hovered over the leather, how her shoulders seemed both tense and relaxed at the same time. He had learned to read small signs like these, subtle shifts in posture, fleeting expressions that spoke more than words ever could. "You're quiet tonight," he said softly, breaking the silence. Clara looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting the warm lamplight. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "about all of this." She gestured vaguely toward the armor, then paused, unsure how to continue. Ethan nodded slowly, encouraging her without pressuring. "Take your time," he said. She let out a soft sigh, her fingers tracing a small scratch in the leather. "It's strange," she admitted, her voice low. "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to feel something." She shook her head slightly, as if trying to organize her thoughts. "I've always been careful not to let people in. Too many times people disappointed me, hurt me, and yet I don't want to ignore this, what I feel." "You don't have to explain it all at once," he said gently. "Some things take time to understand, some things take trust. I didn't expect anyone to do that for me, not for something so personal, and yet you did, and I can't pretend it doesn't mean something." He understood now that the armor was more than leather. It was a symbol of her life, her struggles, and her need to protect herself. By repairing it, he had touched something deeper. "You mean it," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. "You're not pretending." That touch, when your hands brushed mine while you were fixing it, it meant something. I didn't want to admit it, not even to myself, but it did. But I also know when something real is happening, and this feels real. "Walls can protect you," he said softly. "But they also keep out good things, people who care, opportunities to be understood. You don't have to take them down all at once. Sometimes just letting someone in a little is enough to start. I've always been the one to fix things myself, to solve my problems alone. But you've shown me that someone can care without asking for anything in return, that it's okay to trust someone, and it scares me. And it doesn't make you weak, it makes you brave. You're brave enough to feel even when it's difficult. Or that things won't go wrong, But I can promise that I'll be honest with you and patient, and I'll respect your pace. You don't have to rush into anything. But it's hard. She just looked at him, really looked at him, her mind racing with memories of past betrayals and the instinct to protect herself. But there was something different about Ethan, a calm strength, a gentle patience, and a sincerity she hadn't felt in a long time. Something that made her want to take a small risk. "You really mean that?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do," he said firmly, his eyes steady on hers. "I'm not pretending. I don't expect you to drop your walls completely tonight, but I'm here, and I care." I want to believe that," she said softly. "I really do." The armor between them was a quiet reminder of what had brought them together, but now it symbolized something more, a bridge between two people, both cautious, both carrying their own histories, both willing to take a small step toward connection. Finally, Clara reached out slowly, placing her hand lightly on the repaired shoulder strap. Her touch lingered just a moment longer than necessary, and Ethan felt the unspoken meaning behind it. She wasn't ready to fully let go of her fears, but she was willing to let someone in. I don't want to hide anymore," she admitted quietly. "Not with you." They sat like that for a long time, the silence now comfortable, filled with understanding and a gentle closeness that neither had expected. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle, and the world moved on, but inside the workshop, time seemed to stretch, holding them in a space where trust was slowly being built. Clara's shoulders relaxed a little more, her guard lowering in ways she hadn't allowed herself for years. Ethan remained patient, steady, a calm presence in the quiet room. And for the first time in a long while, Clara allowed herself to feel that it was okay to hope, to trust, and to let someone care. The repaired armor lay between them, a symbol not only of skill and patience, but of connection, trust, and the beginning of something fragile yet real. And in that quiet workshop, with the rain still whispering against the windows, two people found a small but profound understanding. A bond formed through care, patience, and the courage to be vulnerable. The morning air was crisp as Clara stepped out of her apartment, the light of the early sun painting the streets in soft shades of gold. Her boots clicked lightly on the wet pavement, the remnants of last night's drizzle glinting faintly in the sunlight. In her arms, she carried the repaired armor, now smooth and sturdy, a symbol of care and patience that had already begun to change the way she thought about trust and connection. Ethan was waiting near the workshop, leaning casually against the doorframe. When he saw her, he smiled, a calm, gentle expression that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. "You're early," he said, though his tone was easy without judgment. "I like being on time," she replied, managing a small smile, "and I wanted to see if we could try something today." "And what might that be?" "If I'm going to trust someone, I guess this is a good way to start." This wasn't just about leather and straps. It was about letting someone in, letting someone touch something that had always been hers alone. "Okay," she whispered, lifting the first piece of the armor toward her shoulders. Ethan's hands hovered near hers, ready to assist but careful not to overstep. Together they adjusted the straps, his movements steady and deliberate, hers tentative but willing. Every brush of their fingers sent a shiver through her, a mix of tension, anticipation, and something she didn't yet understand. "You're doing fine," Ethan said softly, his voice calm, grounding. "Just let me help with this part." The touch was light, reassuring, and she felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. Her muscles, tense at first, relaxed slightly under his careful attention. She had never allowed herself to be this vulnerable, and the realization both terrified and excited her. "Almost there," Ethan murmured, adjusting a buckle at the back. "Just a little more." Instead, he continued carefully, his hands steady and gentle, giving her the space to remain in control while still helping. "There," he said finally, stepping back. "All set. How does it feel?" "It feels different," she said softly. "Not just the armor me, I feel lighter somehow, safer but also braver." There was a quiet moment between them, filled with understanding. Clara realized that this was more than just armor. It was a test, a step toward letting someone into her life, letting herself feel and rely on another person. And for the first time in years, she wanted to take that risk. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "for being patient. For not pushing me." The armor shifted with her, supporting her in ways it hadn't before. She felt strong, capable, but also aware of Ethan standing nearby, ready to assist if needed. "You're doing great," he said. "See, you don't have to face everything alone." "I think I'm starting to believe that." She was learning that trust could be given carefully without fear of losing herself. At one point, Clara paused, standing in front of the table with her hands resting on the leather. She looked at Ethan, her expression thoughtful. "I never thought I'd let someone help me like this," she admitted. "Not with something so personal. Not with me. Scared of letting someone in and getting hurt." I think I trust you," she said softly. "Not completely, not yet, but I want to try." It was a moment of fragile trust, a quiet connection built on patience, care, and courage. Clara took a deep breath, testing the armor again. She moved her arms, her legs, twisting gently to see how it felt. It was comfortable, supportive, and strong. But more than that, it represented something deeper, a willingness to let someone in, to share a small part of herself with someone she was beginning to trust. "You know," she said finally, a faint smile tugging at her lips, "I think this armor is stronger than I realized, not just because of the leather, but because of what it represents. And maybe I am too. And sometimes, letting someone help make it stronger is part of that strength." Clara realized she was smiling more genuinely than she had in years, feeling a sense of safety and trust that was new, fragile, but real. Finally, she set down the last piece of armor, stepping back slightly. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying more warmth than before. "For helping me, not just with the armor, but everything." "You're welcome," he said, "and thank you for letting me in, for trusting me enough to take that step." And as they stood together in the workshop, the morning sun casting its gentle glow, Clara understood something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. That it was okay to be vulnerable, that it was okay to trust, and that sometimes the strongest people were those who allowed themselves to feel, to hope, and to connect. The morning sun was soft and warm as Clara stepped onto the field, the grass glistening with dew from the early light. The historical reenactment battlefield stretched out before her, dotted with wooden obstacles, target dummies, and the faint smell of dust and leather. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs, and adjusted the armor across her shoulders. It felt familiar now, a second skin, repaired and strengthened not just by Ethan's skill, but by the trust and care he had shown her over the past days. Ethan stood at the edge of the field, watching. His presence was steady, calm, and reassuring, like the foundation of a bridge Clara was learning to cross. He gave her a small nod, and she returned it, a flicker of confidence in her green eyes. "Ready?" he called softly, just loud enough for her to hear. Clara nodded, her fingers brushing the smooth leather one last time. She had trained countless hours before, but today felt different. Today wasn't just about skill, it was about trust, patience, and strength built from both care and connection. She felt a new kind of confidence, one that came from knowing she didn't have to face the challenges alone. She moved across the field, testing her steps, feeling the armor shift and support her body with each movement. It was light enough to let her move freely, yet strong enough to hold her upright when she pushed against the wooden obstacles. Each step felt deliberate, precise, but also effortless. She realized the armor symbolized more than protection. It represented resilience, courage, and the willingness to let someone help her grow stronger. Ethan walked alongside the sidelines, watching closely but not interfering. He admired the way she moved, the careful balance of strength and fluidity. Every shift of her weight, every turn, every gesture reflected a confidence that had been slowly built over days of patience, care, and subtle trust. He felt proud, not only of her skill, but of the courage it took for her to allow him to be a part of her life. As the day progressed, Clara engaged in drills with the other reenactors. Each movement tested her endurance and balance, but she felt secure, supported not only by the armor but by the quiet reassurance that Ethan's presence offered. She found herself taking risks she might have avoided before, leaping over obstacles, practicing defensive maneuvers, and even experimenting with techniques that challenged her comfort zone. Every time her hands brushed against a buckle or a strap, she remembered Ethan's patient guidance, and it strengthened her confidence. During a break, she sat on the grass, wiping sweat from her forehead, and glanced toward Ethan. He smiled at her from across the field, a simple gesture that filled her with warmth. She realized that she had begun to trust him fully, not just in small ways, but in the knowledge that he respected her, cared for her, and had never pushed her beyond what she was ready for. It was a rare feeling, one she had not allowed herself to experience in years. "Good work," Ethan said as he approached her, his voice calm and genuine. "You're moving better than ever." "And you helped me see that," she said softly. "Not just with this, but with everything, trust, patience, letting someone care." All of it builds strength. The drills resumed, and Clara found herself paired with another reenactor for a sparring exercise. Her movements were precise, flowing naturally with the rhythm of the mock battle. She blocked, dodged, and shifted without hesitation. Every time she adjusted her stance, she remembered the careful guidance Ethan had offered in the workshop. It wasn't just about the technique. It was about understanding herself, trusting her instincts, and allowing herself to rely on the support she had received. After the sparring ended, she and her partner rested, laughing softly at small mistakes and congratulating each other on successes. Clara felt lighter than she had in years, not just physically but emotionally. The armor had protected her body, but Ethan had helped protect her heart and her confidence. Later, when the day's exercises were over, Clara and Ethan walked to a quiet corner of the field. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and pink. She adjusted the armor one last time, feeling the weight settle comfortably on her shoulders. "You've changed," Ethan said quietly, his eyes observing her with gentle admiration. Clara smiled faintly, a mixture of humility and pride in her expression. "I feel different," she admitted. "I'm not afraid to move forward, I'm not afraid to let someone help me, and I think I can trust more than I used to. That's the strength I admire. Not just of the drills or the practice, but of trust, patience, and courage, and of someone who helped me see that I could be strong and vulnerable at the same time. Because strength is never just about what you carry on the outside. It's about what you allow yourself to feel inside." As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the field, Clara and Ethan walked together toward the edge of the battlefield. The day had been full of small victories, laughter, and quiet moments of connection, each one building toward this final sense of understanding. Clara looked at him, her expression soft but confident. "Thank you," she said again, though this time her voice carried more certainty, more conviction. "For the armor, for your patience, for showing me that it's okay to trust. That's the real courage here." Ethan reached out, lightly touching her shoulder, a simple gesture of connection and reassurance. Clara didn't flinch. Instead, she looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude, trust, and a quiet joy she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. "I trust you," she said softly, her words carrying the weight of everything they had shared, the workshop, the repairs, the lessons in patience and care. Ethan's eyes softened, and he gave a gentle nod. "And I'll always be here," he said, "not just for the armor, but for you." The armor had protected her body, yes, but more importantly, it had been the bridge to trust, connection, and the courage to allow herself to feel. As they walked off the field side by side, Clara realized something important. The battles she had faced before were not just about strength or skill. They were about trust, vulnerability, and the willingness to accept help when it was offered with care. And with Ethan by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next, stronger, braver, and ready to embrace both the protection of her armor and the warmth of a connection she had once thought impossible.